Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us to learn how mentorship drives community college success. I think we can go ahead and dive in now. So just a couple of housekeeping things. Upon entry, your audio is going to be on mute. My name is Alyssa. I will be supporting with the tech things for our session today. This webinar is being recorded, and so we will send that recording out in a follow-up email. And on the screen, you'll see a few tips to help ensure a smooth virtual experience. We suggest adjusting your video layout to speaker view, and as that allows you to see the slide deck and the speaker at the same time. We'd also love to see where everyone is calling in from. So please drop your name and organization in the chat. Throughout the session, you can drop questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and both should be available for you. We'll be monitoring that as we go, and either our panelists today can answer that live, or we'll make sure we follow up or answer those as we go. We encourage you also to use the reactions feature throughout the session to keep things fun and just letting everyone know that you're engaged. Great. So our moderator for today's session is Jennifer Kaios, Director of Marketing here at Mentor Collective. Jennifer is a career educator dedicated to scaling high-impact mentorship and engagement programs with a background in product management and curriculum design. She focuses on the intersection of research, equitable program design, and student success. Jennifer holds a master's in curriculum design from Boston University and is a frequent contributor to thought leadership on the transformative impact of mentorship in higher education. And our panelists today represent multiple perspectives within the community college ecosystem, from the high-level strategy of national trends to the frontline reality of student mentorship. First, we have Glenda Morgan, who goes by Morgan. Morgan is a nationally recognized student success leader and higher education consultant with over 25 years of experience, having held leadership roles at the University of Wisconsin system and the California State University Office of the Chancellor. She's an expert at translating complex research into actionable guidance. Today, she joins us to provide the strategic and market level context for why mentorship is a non-negotiable for student persistence. Next, from Pima Community College, we have Michael Amick. As the Chief Online Learning Officer at Pima, Michael provides the vision and oversight for Pima Online. Since 2015, he has been the architect behind Pima's growth in online enrollment, focusing on how innovative technology and organizational shifts can bridge the gap between virtual instruction and student success. Joining Michael is Andre Bernal. Andre serves as the grant program manager at Pima, where he leads the practical implementation of new initiatives. With nearly a decade of experience in higher ed, Andre's focus is on the how-to, finding sustainable ways to integrate peer-led layers into the virtual student journey while satisfying the rigorous demands of grant-funded programming. And finally, we are joined by Edward Kesler. Edward is the lead peer mentor for the Pima Online Peer Mentoring Program. A veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard, Edward brings a profound background in leadership and service to his work. Having recently earned his cybersecurity degree from Pima, he offers a unique full-circle perspective on what it actually looks like to foster human connection at scale from the student mentor's point of view. Now, before we dive in to our first section on strategy, we want to hear from you. We know that every institution is at a different stage of this journey, so please take a moment to select your top 3 strategic priorities right now. Are you just starting out and looking to launch, or perhaps you have a successful pilot and your primary hurdle is scaling efficiently without losing that human touch? We're also seeing a massive shift towards leveraging AI and technology to bridge administrative gaps, and of course, the ever-present need to measure impact to prove ROI to your leadership. Select up to 3, and we'll use these results to tailor our conversation and ensure we're hitting the topics that matter most to the group. Okay, we'll give everyone a minute to complete. Right off the bat, I'm seeing increased student engagement as a leader in the responses, scaling mentorship efficiently. Nearly everyone is selecting both of those, so very exciting. We also have measuring program impact up there. Okay, great. Well, we'll give maybe 10 more seconds in case the last two want to make any submissions, and then we can jump into our next part. Okay. Great. And so with that, I'm going to pass everything back over to Jen now.
Great. Thank you so much, Alyssa. I'm thrilled to dive in and get this conversation started. So, if you selected any of those options, really, but if you were looking at scale or engagement, that is something we're definitely going to be talking about today. Our roadmap for today's session is up on the screen. We're first going to start talking about the strategic imperative. So, why scaling human connection is really no longer a nice to have, but it's actually something that is a requirement for a high impact program to drive outcomes that you might have, like student success or sense of belonging or career readiness. We'll then get into the weeds a bit with the how of how to do this. We'll talk with our awesome team from Pima Community College about the operational blueprint for managing these initiatives. Then we'll look at the ROI of the lived experience. So how do you connect the dots between structured support and hard data, such as retention and completion? How do you elevate that information to your institution's leadership to make sure you have ongoing support for your initiative? And then lastly, we'll wrap up with sustainability and the future. We'll take out a crystal ball here and we'll discuss how to keep these programs thriving. And throughout, we'll hear from Morgan with perspectives on the market and national trends from our team at Pima Community College, Michael and Andre, and then from Ed, our wonderful peer mentor, will have an authentic experience shared from him as well. So really excited to get going. Let's start with our framing here on why are we here today. So we know the path for community college students is all about balance. We know that the modern student isn't just a student, they are parents, they're full-time employees, they're caregivers. We often talk about the engagement gap, and research shows us that upwards of 60% of students may never set foot in a traditional office-based kind of support service, your career services office, your academic services office. And it's not because the quality is not there, it's because the help seeking hurdle is really just too high when you're balancing those other priorities, like a 40-hour work week or, a family or something like that. Those same students, though, we also know that they're 9 times more likely to disclose life challenges or struggles to completing their degree to a peer over an administrator. And so there's a gap here, right? An engagement gap. And we believe that mentorship is one of the solutions for that challenge. It's a mechanism that can turn support by chance into support by design, ensuring that every student really has a proactive bridge to those resources that they need so that a minor hurdle doesn't become a retention risk. And no school really illustrates that better than our partners at Pima Community College. They have moved beyond just having a program to truly embedding mentorship into the fabric of the student experience. So to tell us more specifically about Pima, I'd love to pass it over to you, Michael. If you could maybe talk a little bit more about Pima's goals and what the program looks like there.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm glad to be with you today. And yeah, so Pima Community College is in Tucson, Arizona. And so Tucson is a community metro of about 1 million people, and we focus on serving that community and the entire county. And so one of the aspects related to online learning is, like many community colleges, post-pandemic, we find ourselves still operating at a very significant volume of online learning that is persisting. And so, again, many of you on the call may be seeing and experiencing that as well, that 45% of our enrollment is in online learning. And really one of the newer aspects related to that data is the numbers and percentage that are 100% online and exclusively online. Where again, pre-pandemic, that was a much smaller number. And now that is 30% of our enrollment each semester, resulting in about 10,000 learners a year. And because of that significant shift that has persisted, one of our challenges was that we hadn't really fully developed and implemented a strategy for handling all of that volume and shift. And so in one way to address that, we applied for the Title V grant. We are a Hispanic serving institution. And the intent of that grant is to strengthen an institution around its needs. So that's what brought us to looking at what are the needs of these learners and how are we going to support them, for their success. And, one of the main things that we have heard from our learners, that's another like newer thing that we have expanded on intentionally, is hearing from learners that are online students in the online environment. And just encourage again all folks on the call to reflect on that and be as intentional as possible to do more to hear from your students and hear from your learners. And we keep trying to expand that as well. One of the clear messages coming through in doing that was that they wanted more connection and more belonging, as well as clarity of the services that are offered to them. And so in taking all of that in and bringing that into what is going to emerge with our needs and strategies and how are we going to address that, that is what led us to exploring things like the mentoring program. Did I answer your question, Jennifer?
Yeah, you sure did. Yeah, I think that's so wonderful, hearing more from your students, right? Like that is something that we all could really benefit from, and yeah, I'm eager to talk more about how you did that. So let's move here into the first section, the strategic imperative. How do we scale the connection? Morgan, I'll start with you. Here, there is often a tension in the community college sector between depth and breadth. Many institutions default to high touch models that serve, maybe 10, 50 students really, really well, but it leaves the other 5,000 alone to navigate the system. From a leadership perspective, why is it a strategic necessity to really move away from these kind of boutique cohorts toward a model of scale, even when resources might be constrained?
Yeah, and I think community colleges are in some ways the ground central of that tension, because you've got approaches like guided pathways versus a more boutique kind of approach like an ASAP project at the CUNY schools and some Ohio schools and elsewhere. So that's sort of how I come to think of it. I mean, I think partly for me, one, it's an equity issue. How come some people get help when some people don't, whereas you may not actually know the life circumstances of all of those people. So one is equity. The other one is sort of sustainability, because often the boutique approaches are funded through grant programs and things like that. And what happens when that goes away? So I think making something a more universal service actually forces you to come to terms with, okay, how are we going to fund this? Is it going to be something that is always there, that is sustained and supported by the institution? The other thing, and it's perhaps less applicable for mentoring, but certainly other sorts of student success things, it's true, is that if something is universal, there's far less stigma attached to it. And something I keep running into with student success things is that students feel ashamed about taking advantage of some services because they're seen as, oh, I'm struggling or something like that. We have to remove that stigma to make it okay to serve help, and making a service universal is okay. The other one, and I think you touched on it in a white paper you shared with me as we were preparing for this, which is about, preparing for careers and for the job market. And those tensions are just not going away and they're applying to everybody. So offering a service that helps people make that bridge into the workforce, whether it's mentoring, whether it's other kinds of student services, are going to become more and more needed right across the institution, not specific to a small group of. So those are some of the things that I think about when trying to think about whether something should be small or large. Sometimes things are small by accident because higher ed loves pilots. And I say this as a long-term higher ed person, and it's hard for them to give up the pilot, but you've got to sort of think about offering something at scale.
Yeah, you're so right. So, and speaking of that bridge that is needed, and going back to what you had said, Michael, about making sure that we're listening to our students, and we're talking about thousands of students, right? You said, upwards of 10,000 students, right? Um, in a massive ecosystem that is as large as Pima, when you're architecting the digital landscape, how can you frame mentorship not so much as another administrative ask to manage, but as this bridge, as this essential infrastructure that's required to really move the needle on enrollment and credit completion, retention? How do you frame mentorship as infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And even just to pick up on Morgan's comments, I think are really are a significant challenge when it comes to scaling a solution, because we do have things that are working and are helping students, and we are just continually challenged to scale them for impact. And we have a lot of conversations that center around that, where we see areas where statistically they are making a difference in their pocket, but when we fold it in to that large data structure, we are not really seeing the lift and change and impact that we want. And so, we have all these conversations about, we're not seeing the data change for the volume of students that we need versus the story about when there was a storm and all the starfish washed up on the beach, and there was a guy throwing one starfish at a time back into the ocean, and a person confronts him saying, "You're never going to make a difference." And he picks up a starfish and throws it back in. And he's like, "I made a difference for that one." And so we have that conversation a lot about how do we really make an impact. And again, to Morgan's point, that equity aspect is critical. That it is something that can be offered and accessed by everyone to take advantage of. And so, really, when we take this feedback that we've been getting from our learners, about one of the things that they want and desire is connection and belonging, um, to the point of like the institution and the resources at the institution are there. They might be sitting there, or we might be bombarding them with information about utilization. That doesn't really address any of an effective use, or especially getting at this belonging component. And so it really is mentorship that strikes that mark. It's not coming from somebody, that you talked about, a learner maybe feeling less than if they need to ask for help, or feeling unsure of themselves, not wanting to do that. When they have a peer that they are matched with, that has aspects that they can relate to each other on, it starts to become about a relationship. And that is what it goes beyond just saying, here's a service, here's something you can use, here's something you can leverage. It becomes about navigating, support, and really relates to that aspect of making a connection.
So zooming in kind of on the equity idea of making sure that we have a initiative that is equitable for everyone. It's providing support for all of the students. Andre, I'd like to turn the conversation to you now and ask, in the design phase of your initiative, which was originally grant funded, right? So in the beginning of that, what was the tipping point where you kind of realized that even the best traditional advising wasn't enough? How or why was a peer-led mentorship layer really the missing piece for ensuring that institutional resources and the lived experiences of your students, there was a bridge between those.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And Michael touched a little bit about this, but really our tipping point was looking at that feedback from students and through student surveys and understanding that even though we had that traditional advising and we have advisors set for our online students, it wasn't enough. It felt more transactional, and they were still craving that peer-to-peer engagement or some kind of engagement from their peers. So I think that's when we realized, okay, we need to implement something, and luckily the grant allowed us to explore different initiatives, ultimately leading to us implementing this peer mentoring program. So again, I think that was kind of we thought we had the support there, and then still coming back and saying no, this isn't enough. We want more of that peer-to-peer connection. That's when we were like, okay, let's explore different options for that. So I think really, the peer mentoring layer helped bridge that gap between some of that institutional support and the student experience, because it added just a level of connection and belonging that the traditional systems of advising cannot provide for our students. So, they weren't looking for just information, but more connection, encouragement, reassurance that they weren't navigating college alone, and connect with students who've been through those similar experiences.
Yeah, I love that. It goes back to what we said at the beginning, right? That you're hearing your students, you're really listening to them and responding. Let's turn now to the how. So how do you do something like this? And Edward, I'd like to start with you. You're on the front lines truly as a lead peer mentor. And so I'm interested in, when an institution is talking about scaling to thousands of students, they are ultimately talking about thousands of individual, starfish, if you will, individual people. So how do you manage the operational challenge of supporting multiple mentees while ensuring that each one of your mentees feels like a person and not just a number or a data point?
Well, I think a good mentor is empathetic, adaptable, resourceful, and trustworthy. Being a good listener, but doing our best not to internalize or personalize perceived failure just because outcomes may not always be what we expected. My approach is to focus on keeping messages consistent, personable, but balanced. So in this semester, I increased the frequency of my student outreach by randomly messaging different participants to just check in, and just to kind of touch base and see, have that individual contact with them. And in many instances, I received replies of appreciation or even sparked more interest in the program. And of course, there are times when mentors might feel like they're in over their head, which is where I might take a little bit more time to try to dig in and get a better feel for how we can, as a team, how we can help ease their concerns. And part of my approach is to maintain open dialogue across multiple pathways with students, admin, and faculty. And also talking through and prioritizing their concerns enables me and the rest of the team to support multiple mentees. So for example, I had a mentee with various concerns, and after talking them through, the mentee was more knowledgeable and seemed more empowered. And that's ideally what we like to see is, just to have that sense of, oh, okay, I can do this. It's more than just a responsibility. This is part of my life that, yeah, I can make it work. So this can be challenging too in itself because of, an online environment. And sometimes, you know, the participants may be hesitant to engage, but becoming familiar with individual profiles and asking those questions or conveying relatable situations, I think brings down some of those barriers.
Mm. Yeah, that's fantastic. I actually want to zoom out now, back out, and Andre, I'd love to ask you how to design a full mentorship program that is reflective of what Ed just said, and it feels authentic. It allows for that kind of empathy and that connection with students, but it also satisfies the data-driven mandates that you might need to get support for your program.
Yeah, it's a great question. Of course, it starts with really balancing structure and then the authenticity of the program. This is a grant-funded project, and we want to make sure we're tracking outcomes like student success, persistence, retention, and even sense of belonging. So we want to be able to still do that and understand if the program is truly making an impact, but don't want it to feel transactional and forced. At the same time, we know students they recognize that the interactions are just scripted and transactional. So Ed was a big part of that goal of us making this feel more authentic, was have a lead peer mentor who's going to be doing that outreach, providing those resources for our mentors and mentees so that it feels like it's coming from a person. Even with some of our assessments that we want our students to fill out when we're tracking at some of that data, we want Ed to send that out and not come from us. So it just feels more personable, right? So we're still able to track everything, but making it feel more on a personal level. One thing that we really wanted to do with Ed was create a peer mentor community where he would lead that community, provide resources, have open office hours where mentors can jump in and ask him questions and share challenges. So we created this community with just our mentors to be able to do exactly that, share resources with each other, challenges, connect, just so that it feels like an authentic program and it's not all about just finding these numbers and getting data out of these students. So having Ed just being able to connect with students on a more human level has really helped that balance between, pulling data and making this program more authentic to our students.
I love that. Yeah, and so zooming way out, where does technology as a whole fit in here? Morgan, I'd love to get your take on this. You see a lot of ed tech and quote unquote student success tools. So what's the danger of an institution trying to build at scale with, only using spreadsheets or manual outreach, but what's the danger also of technology, right? Like
Yeah.
what's the right approach? Where does technology as a whole fit into this human to human connection?
Well, on the one side of that spectrum of on the spreadsheet side, and Andre mentioned the term transactional. If you're thinking of your mentoring as just a transactional thing of I gotta hook this person up with that person to do some mentoring, a spreadsheet probably would be okay. But if you actually are thinking of mentoring or clinical placements or anything like that as part of student success, as part of a larger undertaking, then you're going to want different functionality in there. You're going to want different kinds of people to be involved. You're going to want different kinds of feedback. You're going to want the data and those kinds of things. So it depends on what you're trying to do. But if you're taking it seriously, I think you're going to want some more functionality there. Um, and I think on the other side of the spectrum, there always is a danger of technology. Something I run into a lot is what I call technology solutionism. It's like, oh, I've got a problem, let me buy something and plug it in and my problem's solved. And it doesn't work like that. I mean, as Pima is describing, there's lots of work that goes into actually making something work. It's not the technology that makes it work. It's all the stuff around that. The technology maybe enables some things and makes it work, but the technology itself is not magic. It's not like an air conditioner, which is often how I think about it. The air is hot, I'm going to plug it in and there will be cool. It's not like that. Student success doesn't work like that. So, I think uh, you've got to find a balance in those two kinds of things. But the other kinds of things with a spreadsheet is that it belongs to a person often, and you want this to be an institutional undertaking, so that if the person leaves, those kinds of things. This is what a scale. And I think if you look at some of the low participation rates and ghosting of things that happen in mentoring, it's often linked to you don't have the right infrastructure around that, as well as the right policies and procedures and training and culture. But they all work together.
Yeah, wonderful. And yeah, I think that's why we're all in this room together, right? Is this partnership between Pima and Mentor Collective. We were able to make that happen, right? At scale. So something to keep in mind. Yeah, as we're moving into the age of all things AI, right? So moving into ROI and thinking through how are we going to get this paid for, right? So, Michael, I want to ask you this now. So, you have to answer for metrics like retention and credit completion and graduation. How do you link ROI of belonging and connection to a cabinet or a board who might be more focused on bottom line? Like, how do you get the buy-in to get a program supported and well resourced?
Yes, thank you. That is a challenge. And just a little bit of context is that, historically in online learning or in the work that I've done historically, there has always just been this focus on success. What can we do to make the student successful in that course? And that's just, we've had initiatives on that over and over and over again. And about 2 years ago, Pima Community College got a new CEO, Chancellor Nassy, and he has really come in and done a deep dive into the historical data of the institution and is bringing that focus across the college with all stakeholders in leadership. In fact, he has a meeting every Friday morning with leaders across the units of the college to come in and talk about retention, persistence, and graduation. And so that we're all sitting there at the table being tactical about what we can do. And so I'm bringing these elements to that conversation about what's happening in online learning. Because what again is a common data point with online learning is that its success, persistence, and retention lag when it comes to students that are on campus, and very concerned now that what I just shared earlier, as we have this expanded percentage of what we have going online, is that pulling down the entire institutional data when it comes to these points. And so I think to answer that question about the ROI is that it is in the data. We need to see the needle move. And when we looked at our historical data and all the initiatives that we've been doing, we've seen very little lift. And so that's why there is this focused coordination across the college to really be unsiloed and working together so that this data does begin to move for our learners. And when it comes to the mentorship aspect, we really feel like we are early in the process. This is new for us, and the data that we are seeing is a bigger lift than we have seen, in other initiatives. We are still challenged by scaling this. And so we are approaching it from an equity basis in that, we have, first of all, so many of our learners are first generation college students, so much so that, this Friday I'm participating in a first gen celebration event. And also that then we now offer mentorship to all of our online learners that are new to higher education. They have the opportunity to select and participate in the mentorship program. And our focus now is going to be on how to grow and expand and scale that because of the results that we are seeing.
So, that's a perfect transition into the next question here I have for you, Morgan, where, I'm thinking through other indicators of long-term success and how that can be tied back to ROI. We talked a little bit earlier about workforce and career readiness. So I'm interested in if you could walk us through some of the other psychosocial levers that mentorship pulls, maybe self-efficacy, academic persistence, how those translate into tangible ROI. And then, looking forward towards the future, how does mentorship or structured connection serve as a way to support folks as they're going to workforce and career readiness as they're going towards long-term mobility?
Yeah, and entirely accidentally, I wrote about this yesterday in a newsletter. In part because I was thinking about it, and then it just suddenly happened. A friend of mine makes the comment that he can't wait to hear what he's going to say next, and that I feel the same way about my writing. I can't figure out what I'm gonna say next. But I essentially landed up on, I was looking at a white paper of yours, at a paper from the Kennedy School, the Project on Workforce, and Every Learner Everywhere, a report from them. And I decided that mentoring and those sorts of things were a and what we needed in student success was what I called a translation infrastructure, because there's a lot of information out there for students, but they often have difficulty making sense of it. Whether it's the workforce, whether it's making their way through the institution, actually making use of social capital and things like that. And things like mentoring are useful in that they are relational, they are ongoing, so they're not a one-shot thing like a lot of student success kinds of things. So they can play a big role in terms of things like belonging, in terms of people's ability to navigate some of the complexities of institutions, especially first generation students, and those kinds of things. And you mentioned it yourself at the very beginning of the webinar about how so many students who leave don't ever talk to anybody. And I've seen multiple surveys that put it at 60 to 70% of students who stop out didn't ever talk to anybody. And I think if you start to build in more peer kinds of things or more mentoring kinds of things where there's a trust and an ongoing and actual relationship, that we can push that number down, because I think there are solutions there. So I think they can directly feed into things like retention, things like speed to graduation, and as well as the sort of general value that students get out of higher ed, which is an increasing problem, I think, for higher ed, and something that desperately needs to be addressed. I think I went off topic, so pull me back if you need to,
No,
or we can move
it's
on.
great. That's great. I think that last bit is so critical, right? Is tying it back to the value. We're talking about ROI from the institution's perspective, but it's also the student's perspective, right? Like, what value are they getting out of their education? So that's so critical, and actually that's a perfect setup to pivot to Edward. I am wondering, you have just such a wonderfully unique background, from the Coast Guard to earning your cybersecurity degree at Pima. I'm interested in your own journey as a student, how that informed the way that you lead as a peer mentor, and what's one thing that a peer mentor can provide that truly a faculty member or maybe an automated email or something like that really couldn't provide. What kind of value does a peer mentor provide to the student?
That's a good question. And think about where to begin. Let me first start by saying this, that in my experience, being a student is extremely humbling, but it's a lifelong journey. So back when my first managers in the military were probably the best mentors I've had, because they set me up for a lot of the way I think today. And they were incredibly supportive of the development, and always, always, always encouraging me to take advantage of opportunities to learn and to build a community. So there's a certain level of comfort navigating, I'll say, academic systems that I've been through before, and through different phases. So I've been through graduate colleges. I've done the old school correspondence courses, and just taking classes here and there. But it's still daunting, regardless of whatever life phase you're in, because life happens and you can't control that. So generally speaking, my circumstances are unique to my overall journey, but the situations I've experienced, not so much. Um, a lot of times I get students that are, I can look at their profile and see, okay, yeah, they're, maybe I wasn't first gen, but there's family things, or they've experienced a loss, or, they're working 2 or 3 jobs at a time and trying to manage, 18 credits. And it's like, wow,
Yeah.
this is relatable. So, um, and this is what inspires my approach to mentoring, because taking from the lived experience of learning to ask questions, getting past procrastination, and then taking advantage of all the available resources Pima, or any institution for that matter, really has to offer. And then comparatively speaking, I think one thing a mentor provides is an ungraded, equitable perspective. And as a mentor, we help bridge the gap toward academic independence by recognizing that while we all have 24 hours in a day, we aren't all in the same place. And yes, I did borrow that from Mentor Collective.
Did you?
Yes, that was a resource that I have put out there to our mentors and mentees. Like, this is something that I've questioned too, because you hear it all the time, but it's like, you got to consider the situations and circumstances each person is dealing with.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, this is a very good point. So our program is here to make sure that whether you're a first gen or returning student or non-traditional like me, you don't have to navigate the system alone.
Gosh, Ed, that was just so wonderful. Yeah, just such a good reminder of why we're doing this, right? It's that sense of belonging that you're going to be able to persist. It can be really challenging to navigate the student experience. Like you're saying, just imagining that student who might have 18 credits and then they have a family and they're working full time, or they're first gen, or they have had a loss, all these things that might be happening in their life, and the value that a mentor can bring to their experience. So, keeping that in mind, we're going to move forward here and how to ensure that the initiative that's set up to support a mentee sustains itself, that it's able to support all mentees, and that want to engage in mentorship, and that it's something that persists into the future. So, Michael and Andre, I'd love to hear from you about making sure that mentorship was an option that was seen as almost strong enough to become, an institutional pillar, right? And not just a side project. I know that Pima faced a significant challenge when grant funding was discontinued, and I'm interested in your thoughts on, how did you navigate that transition so that mentorship also didn't disappear? How did mentorship become a case that was strong enough to be absorbed into other budgets, and become really a pillar at the institution?
Yeah, we want to go ahead and invite Andre to share a little bit from his perspective, and then I can um, fill in more information if that's okay, Andre.
Yeah, definitely. For us, we were in the process of, like I said, getting ready to launch this before we got noticed that we were getting defunded. So we were already had our mentors and mentees signed up for the program, and we were just getting ready to launch, and then we got that unfortunate news. So we didn't want to stray away from what we've built, and we've had all this excitement up, and we worked so hard and rolling out this mentorship program. And right away we hit our goal within 3 weeks of having over 100 students sign up and participate in the program. So we saw that initial need was very strong. We wanted to make sure that we were able to continue that. Luckily for us, we had already been through that first initial phase of getting everything set up, and we were okay funding wise for that first year. But as we roll out into years 3 and 4, we wouldn't have those funds on there. So we made sure to kind of get that rolled out and if the program started. And then, as we were looking at different ways, how are we going to fund this program moving forward? We were lucky enough for Michael and the Pima Online budget to absorb that cost moving forward and take care of those 2 additional years. And again, it's just because we saw that initial want from our students of wanting to have a peer mentoring program. What helped us also validate that after the fall semester, because we launched this pilot in fall of 2025, was we wanted to look at some success rates and persistence rates for our students, for both mentees and mentors who participated in the program. And as Michael mentioned earlier, we saw a significant increase in persistence and success, over 70%, where traditionally we would see about 50, both in persistence and success. So that kind of reaffirmed us of, yes, this is what our students want, and we're seeing early data on that. So we want to continue to build that out and continue moving that forward. So in our minds, it was enough to wanted to continue to launch this mentor program and get it funded through other ways as we continued on. So Michael, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, the objective of the Title V grant is to strengthen the institution. And so, part of the language in there is that the elements that we're doing in that grant will become institutionalized. They will be taken up. The challenge is that, that was supposed to be incremental over the remaining 3 years of the grant. And so really in March or April of 2025, when these first signals from the administration came out, we began budget planning at that time to try to prepare for what this might look like if this happens. And we saw cancellations coming through for, in other elements of the college like TRIO, et cetera. So that when this did happen in the fall of 2025, we had some planning in place. I think we were still in a budget meeting every day for about a month, Andre, trying to work through this. It was very difficult, very challenging, but we did do some of that preliminary legwork so that we could select some aspects to bring into our budget that we just wanted to begin that institutional uptake much earlier. And that's how we were able to do that and continue to move forward. Because this is one of the main things that we've heard from our students, connection, it's really imperative for us to make sure we're doing something to respond to that. Still very difficult. The students say they want to connect, and so we're like, hey, we're trying to connect with you. And, Ed works with mentors that are asking that question, like, why aren't we hearing from folks at times? So it's still a deep challenge for us. We still don't feel like we've gotten it quite right. However, it's just one of these things that's so critical. Every online student that I speak with, I ask them why are they taking it online, and they always have a specific reason as to why they're doing that. But the overarching reason is they would not be able to access their education unless they could do it online.
Right.
And it's so critical for our community. Unfortunately, Tucson is a high poverty city. And so this access to education and having it be successful is just critical for those learners to change their path and have a career that provides a livable wage in our community. And so we've felt really, important that we have to have strategies that fulfill this request for connection and are, reflecting an impact on the data.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Morgan, I am wondering then for a leader who is watching this, who's, it sounds just like so much work, right? What we've talked about here, and they might feel overwhelmed by some of the silos that they have at their own institution. How can leaders consolidate their efforts? You heard Michael and Andre talking about multiple different efforts that were able to kind of be married together to create this culture of mentorship. How can other leaders do that? What's kind of the first starting point to help them consolidate their efforts?
You all stole my thunder because what I was going to say as you started, was thinking about the silos, and that's so much of a problem in student success is that you've got multiple things going on. So the first thing would be to check what else is going on and to try and build some of those sort of connections there. The other part is also just to have a plan, because I think sometimes people sort of stumble into these kinds of things. But some things that I would address are things like incentives, and they don't necessarily need to be financial, but like why are people going to participate in this, particularly the mentors, if it's additional labor and things like that. The other one is expectations. I think really laying out what you expect of mentors and also even mentees as well, sort of making those clear so that people have a sense of what all is involved. I would also have some milestones, and this is true of most projects, but what kinds of things do you want to get by what point? And that's sort of part of that, having that plan in place. But how are we going to measure what we're doing and figure out where we're making progress there? So those are sort of some of the big ones. I also uh, think there used to be a phrase about eating your own dog food, but I prefer the one drink your own champagne. Um, Amongst other things, it sounds better. It tastes better, I suspect. But I would actually make senior leadership actually participate in a mentoring thing, in some sort of mentoring process in a meaningful way, so that they have a sense of what all is involved. And so that they can understand it as they try and manage it. So those are some of the ones, but and they seem sort of fairly humdrum, but I think you've got to take care of the boring stuff to get the big payout at the end.
Wonderful. I love that idea of getting senior leadership involved. That's fantastic. And Ed, as we're wrapping up here, we're coming close to the top of the hour. And we've talked a lot about this, the what and the how, and I want to end on the who, right? So, is there a specific moment you can highlight for us, or a conversation with a mentee that really sticks with you? One where maybe you realize that without their connection, their journey at Pima would have looked very different. I'd love to hear any story that you feel comfortable sharing with us.
There was a moment that stands out when there was a student was having a difficult time with figuring out what resources was best suited for them, and they were panicking about were they going to be able to persist and keep their classes, because we'd reached a point where they were at that they could not drop anything and they couldn't afford to take a low grade because their financial aid would be in jeopardy. So this took some time, but it was doing this all online. I was able to establish a connection, but also build that trust because I incorporated the entire team, and even though they may not have known about it, they were in the background of what I was portraying as, hey, you've got a group here, a whole support network. And so the student, after all this was said and done, the student was actually able to work through they prioritized and they were able to work through their difficulties, and they seemed to have confidence. To me, at least, what they conveyed is that they had the confidence in asking for help, not just trying to do it alone, but asking for help and navigating the resources that were available to them. So
Wonderful. Thank you. It's such a great way to close us out here. Just to know, there, like you had said, there's a whole network behind that mentoring relationship of support that's providing, access and opportunity for the student.
mhm.
All right. So, Alyssa, thank you. If we could hop over to our last few slides here, I just want to say a huge thank you, Morgan, Michael, Andre, Ed. Thank you for sharing your stories with us today. I'm really struck by so much of what was said. But mentorship isn't really, it's not a nice to have. It's truly, like Ed had said, it's really this, this network, this bridge between student lives and their academic goals. And I would love if folks in the room today saw something that resonated, and you're looking for a partner who might handle some of the administrative heavy lifting, the tech behind that human connection, we are here to support you at Mentor Collective. We'd love to talk. So Alyssa has put a poll up on the screen there. If you're interested in architecting a similar mentorship model that could drive ROI for your institution, hit yes, I'd like to learn more, and we'll talk. All right, and as folks are wrapping that up, I will actually pass it back to you, Alyssa, to talk through some of our upcoming events that we have throughout the month of May and into June.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, Jen. I'll leave the poll up for maybe a couple more seconds just in case there were any more responses coming in. And then we can hop into some of our upcoming events. Great. So later on this month, we'll have our 1890 Centers of Excellence Student Success and Workforce Development Spring Symposium, as well as the Massachusetts Success Symposium coming up in June. So be on the lookout for more information about some of these. And of course, as we go through the summer, I imagine we'll continue having more and more events to share out with, and we'll keep everyone in the loop on those.
Awesome. Thank you. And again, thank you, everybody. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. This was such an awesome conversation. We will send the recording of this and some follow-up communication out in an email that you'll receive early next week. We'll also include a link to Morgan's newsletter on student success, which is an awesome read. You can read that article she wrote just yesterday, right? So thank you folks for joining us, and I hope you have a really great rest of your day.